Cripple Chronicles, a podcast about ilizarov frames, amputation, and the journey to accepting and embracing disability. My name is Becca and I am your host. I had an ilizarov frame on for roughly about 2.5 years before I had to make the decision of amputating my leg in August 2022. I really hope that through this podcast I can just be my authentic self and be honest about the things that I have been through in the last 3 years, and also just life in general, because it's difficult and sometimes you need to speak about it. And I think I have a very kind of positive, bubbly, warm energy, and I just hope that although the things that I speak about were hard and rough to get through, I hope that this is some way of bringing some positivity into the world. So I started last week's episode and the podcast off by talking about what happened during my accident, the 3-month stay in hospital and the challenges that I was faced with during that time. And this week I'm going to be talking about getting home and what that adjustment was like, and the supports that I had in place, and any kind of tips that I have got. And yeah, so if you are like me and you enjoy consuming your podcasts on YouTube, then there is a video version of this podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hello. Give me a wee like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what your thoughts were. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other audio places you get your podcast, please rate and review, and I will get straight into the second episode. So we are now at the 12th of March 2020, which was exactly 3 months after I had my accident, and I had been working with the OTs and the physios over the 3 months that I was in hospital to make sure that all of the equipment that I needed at home was there when I got home. So the equipment that I had was, I had a commode in my bedroom with a bucket under it. I had a commode chair over the toilet in our bathroom, which was very small and very compact, not room for a sink or anything, literally just a toilet in there. I had a bar at the side of my bed, which helped me with standing up and sitting down, just something for me to push my weight through. And I also had one of the wee hostess push trolley things, which I wasn't actually allowed to use it as a walker because of the frame and how unstable I was. So I had to use my crutches and just push the trolley in front of me. And that was kind of how I got on with it. And another wee thing that I did was, I feel like everybody kind of used to judge me a wee bit for this, because it's not the most it's not the best way to do things, but it was pretty practical. And when I would have toast and things on a plate or in a bowl, I would just put it on the floor and use my crutches to move it across the floor, because I couldn't carry it and I had to find another way to improvise, adapt, overcome, all that jazz. So anyway, back to the things that I had in place that had been set up by the OTs and the physios with the help of my dad when they were planning for my discharge from hospital. I had a community alarm, which I think I mentioned on last week's episode, which is a wee red button that you wear around your wrist or around your neck. And this button is connected to a box that you have connected to your telephone line. And when you press it, you are then in contact with a member of staff at a control centre, and whatever it is you need, they then contact the correct people. So carers if you have had an accident, or they can phone emergency services for you as well. There is also different things they can use other than the buttons that you have. There is also things like pressure mats or heat sensors or smoke detectors, which all link up and help to keep disabled people safer when they're at home. And it also just gives that, I found for me, it gave that bit of reassurance to my family that when I was living alone, I was going to be safe in doing that because I had a connection that if anything was to happen. So I got taken down to the departure lounge and I got picked up by patient transport to take me home, and I was so excited because I knew that I was going to get to see Simba. However, I had been very cautious to go to the toilet before I had went down to the departure lounge, but the closer I was getting to home, the more I was needing to pee, and I just didn't quite make it in time, which it hasn't been the first time, and it certainly won't be the last, because sometimes these things just happen, whether you're disabled or not. I pissed myself plenty of times before being disabled, and that was just from laughing or coughing too much. Anyway, so got home, and I think my dad must have got a very big fright when he comes through the door to bring Simba home and to have this meeting with the OTs about the community alarm. And I shout, "Dad, I need some help. I've had an accident." And he was probably thinking, "My gosh, what has this girl done now? Like, what is she? Has she fallen or something?" No, I did not think that the happiness and the excitement of being home would be overshadowed with an insane feeling of embarrassment of having to watch your dad clean your pee up off of the floor. Like, that was straight in at the deep end for the emotions of the day. Like, that was well up there. So after getting all that cleaned up and getting the embarrassment out of the way, I was reunited with Simba and I was so buzzing. Got him out of his wee case and he was very hesitant around me, which I kind of expected. Like, he fell out with me when I would go on holiday for 2 weeks. Never mind when I had left for 3 months and the only time he had seen me was when I was crying through a phone screen. The community OT then came out on the day that I was discharged, and like I had mentioned with the community alarms, they are connected to a box which is connected to your telephone line. In the house that I was in, the bedroom downstairs was basically on the opposite side of the house to where the telephone line was, and it was pretty thick walls, like Wi-Fi struggled to get through it. So we had a few test runs of me pressing the button, then picking up and me shouting to say, "Hi, I've had a fall. Are you able to hear me? Can you get me some help?" And it was about 4 times, and I started to feel really stupid because my dad and the OT were through in the living room next to the box whilst I was in my bedroom, and they were saying, like, "We're just checking it's working," and letting the people know what was happening, but I still just felt really silly in that situation. And I know that I shouldn't have, because although I never actually had to use my community alarm, doing tests like that were things that made me feel safer when I was at home, because I knew wherever I had a fault in the house, I would be able to press that button and shout and somebody would be able to come out and help me. I did, however, accidentally press the community alarm a few times, and I think one of the times I was cleaning my pins and I got it caught, and it went off, and my brother was living with me at the time, and he was through and he'd said, like, "Oh, it's okay, it was just an accident." And then they had said, like, they must have said, "Okay, that's fine," went to, like, end the call, but pressed the wrong button, forwarded us through to the emergency services, and I was like, everything is fine, like, I'm all good here, just a bit of a mix-up, but oh my gosh. I had mentioned last week about having carer support and not wanting the company that I used to work for to be the people that were providing the support to me. If you remember the date I mentioned probably about 10 minutes ago, the 12th of March 2020, that was 11 days before we went into the first COVID lockdown. So there were some issues with the carers coming in because there was people that had went on holiday and they couldn't get back. There was people who had long-term health conditions and they were having to shield for the benefit of their own health. And I could understand these things. So social work phoned me up and said that they were going to have to outsource to the company that I used to work for and asked me if that was okay. And I said, that is totally fine if nobody that I used to work with comes in. And they had agreed that that was fine, that would be what would happen. However, the first person that turned up was somebody that I worked with. So that made me uncomfortable and I phoned up and social work kind of took it on board and they said they would speak to them. And then thankfully the next visit that came that was outsourced was somebody that I had never worked with before. However, I could tell that the other people that I had worked with had been kind of filling them in because they knew things about me, and that then also made me uncomfortable. But I just left it because I was like, they have done what I asked, and that was to not send in people that I work with, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I wasn't getting personal care or anything like that. It was literally emptying my commode, making my dinner for me. So having somebody that I had worked with a few times but not really had a relationship outside of that, I was just kind of letting it pass because I could understand that there was literally a global pandemic going on and I wasn't going to try and cause any more issues. However, the night where things kind of changed was a car pulled up outside, and straight away I was just filled with like insane, intense anxiety. And the reason for that was the person who drives that car was a friend of mine for a really long time. And before I had the accident, we were really close. And they ended up coming to see me once and let me down quite a few times with visits and stuff when I was in the hospital. And I had kind of mentioned it, and after that, we hadn't spoken. So it had been 2.5 months maybe that we hadn't spoken for. And I was just so worried that they were going to come in and I was going to have to say, like, yeah, can you empty my pee out of the commode and make me some carbonara for my dinner? Like, I didn't want to do that. Thankfully, it wasn't them that came in, it was somebody else who I had also worked with, but I was very happy that it wasn't the other scenario. So again, it was one of those things that it's like, I asked for people that I didn't used to work with to come in. However, somebody I did used to work with come in, but it wasn't somebody who used to be a really close friend to me that had hurt me. So it was all a lot of emotions. I felt as if I was going slightly insane, but the next day I phoned up social work and I says, look, I can't do this. I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to have to feel like this every night when it comes to tea time and somebody's coming in and I'm going to be worried about who it is. And I can't live my life like that. And thankfully, they switched the care company for me, and I actually ended up being looked after by the care company who had looked after my papa. And there was two carers who were my papa's carers who also ended up being my carers. And a very lovely thing is they were the reason that I went into working in home care, because I remember speaking to my papa because he was very against carers, and I asked him how he was getting on and he says, I don't even feel like they're my carers, I feel like they're my best friends. And the way that I was treated, I could definitely understand why he felt like that. Out with having carers who were scheduled to come in twice a day at tea time and at tuck, which is usually between like 7 or 8ish. I also had a re-enablement team who were a group of ladies. I don't think they had any males working for them, but not saying that you can't. I had a group of ladies who would come in. It would be usually two of them at a time, and they would help me and supporting me to make my lunches, do things like empty the washing machine and hang my washing up, and maybe if I was making lunch, they would then do my dishes for me so that I was conserving energy in that way. And that was just kind of really about me settling back into home and finding the things that I was still able to do and having the support to do them initially. They also did some kind of small risk assessment things, like if I was to make pasta or soup, how would I do that in a safe way, which are all good things to do and kind of see, because it was that way where I had carers coming in, but I was still being able to live a slightly independent life, but not really. So, in terms of other support that I had when I was initially discharged from hospital, I had a physio come out to see me who had kind of asked about what my goals were, and initially my goals were just to get the frame off and get my life back, and doing the walking and stuff like that I had done in the hospital. I wasn't really sure what I should be doing at home. So she had said that they were probably not going to come out again because of COVID and restrictions, and I had said that the one thing that I would like to do before they discharged me was to go out and see how I was getting on walking in my driveway, because there was chuckies, like small stones, and I didn't quite know with my crutches, and I had a bit of a raise on my shoe. I didn't know how those things would work and if I would be able to walk over the stones to get out of the house, because I still wanted that opportunity to go and get some fresh air, even if in the first 7 months, even the first kind of year and a half, 2 years, I didn't really take that opportunity a lot. So she helped me kind of get my footing and stuff on the stones and in the drive, and that was fine. And then I think it was maybe 2 meetings. That was all the physio support that I had for the first time that I had my frame, I think up until August or September of 2020. And finally, I had some mental health support from a charity volunteering organisation that was literally like directly across from where I stayed. I had it was like a once a week telephone call, and kind of what I had mentioned in the first episode about, I felt really invalidated because I knew that if I tried to get help from the community mental health team, they were going to look at what was said in the hospital and they were just going to agree that it was a physical issue and not a mental health issue, and I wouldn't get support. But then doing it through a charity and volunteering organisation, sometimes I felt like I was maybe taking up time that could have been used more by somebody else. Or there was some days where I just wanted to stay in bed and pull the covers over my head and not even pick up my phone. So when it rang and it was a support worker call, I didn't feel as if I could fully engage in it because I just didn't want to even be alive at that point. It was so difficult. I think a lot of the time for the first year and a half, I felt like such a burden. I felt like I was putting stress on my family. I felt so guilty for everything that I was putting everybody else through. I couldn't understand how I was getting through everything that I was getting through. I was just kind of telling myself that like it needs to get better. I'm going to get my life back. Everything's going to be fine. And a lot of the time, and I think I said that a lot as well, and I still really do feel like it just felt like it was one big long nightmare, and I just wanted to know when I was going to wake up from it. I think a lot of the first 7 or 8 months that I had the frame on, my mindset very much was, this is going to be over soon. I'm going to get my life back. I'm going to go back to being a nurse. everything is going to be fine and it's going to work out, and that's that. That was my tunnel vision thinking, was I'm going to get my old life back. And that was so very, very wrong. However, it stopped me from doing certain things that would have aided me along the way. And one of those things was with the OT input. I had been offered to change the small bathroom downstairs into a wet room. They would basically demolish one of the walls, bring it out because there was like a space in the kitchen that could go in it. And the positive of it was I would have somewhere I could get washed, and because where I lived was a lot of older people, it would have added value to the house of having that accessible bathroom down the stairs. However, with the way things were, they had said that it would probably be the fact that my dad would have to put in the money for it, and then within like 6 to 8 months he would be reimbursed by the NHS. And I just felt like I couldn't make a decision to make changes to a house that I didn't own, that I was just staying in, for something that was going to be over in a short amount of time and I was going to get my life back. With that thinking, because of how quickly my leg did heal, I could have potentially had the frame off and my dad wouldn't have been paid back for the bathroom. But on the other side of the coin, I would have actually been able to have a shower and be washed properly for 2 years, because I couldn't get up the stairs to get to the bathroom. So I just had to wash myself in the sink, wash my hair in the kitchen sink. It eventually got better after my brother moved in with me and we got one of the shower head hose adapters for the tap. But it felt so good when I was finally able to get that shower. And I just think, if I hadn't been so stubborn and tunnel vision on the fact that everything was going to go back to normal, I could have had that so much sooner. However, can't change the past. We can only work on what we can do in the future. So a few weeks after I had got home, I had my first clinic appointment back up at the hospital to get my x-rays done and to find out how the healing was going. And this was the first appointment that I had to attend on my own because of COVID, and it was thought to be the safer thing if I went on my own. My dad did phone me whilst I was in so that he could hear what the surgeon was saying and ask any questions, and we kind of did that for the first few months. Going for the x-rays always made me extremely anxious because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if it was healing or not. I was just riddled with anxiety and fear of the unknown, and I was quite a few times where I would be lying on the table getting my x-rays done and I wouldn't be able to hold in the tears because of how anxious I was feeling. Unfortunately, at that appointment, my surgeon told me that it didn't look as if my bone was healing how they would expect it to be healing at that point. And also, I had been told before I was discharged hospital that I would have 6 weekly checkups where I would get x-rays and know kind of how I was progressing. However, because of COVID and wanting to reduce the likelihood of me catching COVID or spreading it if I was to have it, they decided that I wasn't to have another clinic appointment for 6 months. And it was kind of left that if in 6 months my bone was still showing the same as it was now, that I would potentially have to get it amputated. The potential of amputation was always there through the whole 3 years. The frames take an absolutely massive toll on your mental health, the worries of if it's healing, if you're doing enough, getting pain from the pinsites, how tiring it is, trying to do everyday tasks and finding it more difficult, comparing yourself to what you were like before you had the frame, feeling like a burden on your family and your friends because you're having to ask for more help. And I think sometimes when my family would try and help me, I would find that I would get really angry or upset because of the insecurities that I had, that I wasn't doing enough, and this kind of like deep rooted shame and fear. And that ended up kind of manifesting as anger. And one example of this is after I had finished engaging with the re-enablement team, I then would get up in the morning and I would get a wash and I would make myself some lunch, and then I would get back into bed and chill out. And whilst I was up and about during the day, I would pick something that I was having for dinner, so that when the carer came in at tea time, I could say, I have this, this, and this in the fridge. I think I'm going to have that for my dinner tonight. And one of the carers came in and she had said, "What are you having?" And I think it was something like sausage and mash or spaghetti bolognese. And she was like, "Okay, get up and show me." And I was like, "What do you mean, get up and show you? I was literally up like 45 minutes ago. That's how I know what's there." And she was like, "Oh, it's just that your dad had asked us to be kind of encouraging you to get up and like pick what you're having for dinner at night." And initially, this just really upset me and angered me, because it was that kind of way where I felt like I wasn't doing enough. So I felt like that was an attack from my dad, that he didn't think I was doing enough. And I sat with a feeling for a while, and I knew that there was no way that I couldn't kind of approach it. And I had messaged him and I had said, "Look, I'm really upset and I'm really angry, and I feel like you're treating me as a child by trying to control what the carers are doing." And I don't know if that was the best way to deal with it, but I knew that I had to say something. And when we had spoke about it, it was a conversation of the fact that I'm an adult and I can make my own decisions, and I can understand that your family is going to have ways in which they think they can help you, but it's always good to have a chat about it first rather than going and doing it, because then that ends in me feeling insecure and attacked. And it might not even be for the reasons, it's just my dad might have thought, "Oh, well, getting up is going to help you get better because that's what the hospital said." And it was that kind of way where I was living on my own. It was only me that was seeing the things that I was doing during the day. So it is totally natural for people to kind of try and help and do things to help. I think you might have already guessed from the first episode and a half that my dad was quite a big support when I had my accident. He was one of the first people to be contacted. He had to tell my family. He had to deal with the insurance company, which was a whole nightmare. He helped with the physios and the OTs and getting the equipment sorted and doing measurements about the house. Him and my brother had to bring everything from my room that was upstairs to the downstairs of the house, and the room that I was basically bedbound in for 2.5 years didn't really have any wallpaper or paint, so they put up my tapestries and some fairy lights to make it feel a wee bit more like home. My dad and my stepmom were two of the only people that I really saw during the first lockdown, apart from the carers that I had coming in, and also somebody that I was seeing at the time. However, it is not the ex that I launched through the windscreen. He did show up for me a lot when I was in hospital, and there was a lot of things that I started to feel like we were actually kind of going to be a thing, because when I crashed the car, we were in a friends with benefits kind of situation. I wasn't looking for a proper relationship. I was just trying to get through uni, and having him show up and kind of really want to be there and support me made me think that there was something there. But round about coming to the time I was getting discharged from hospital, I started to kind of feel like he was getting a bit fed up, and I found out later on down the line that he kind of felt the same way about me. So I was obviously feeling all these things in the inside but not really showing it outwardly. The one thing that kind of stopped us from forming any kind of proper relationship was he had came to see me not long after I had got out of hospital, and he had brought food over to make himself dinner, and I had said to him about cleaning up after himself, which he had agreed to do, and that was fine. And then we were in bed and he had went to go and get something, and he stood up on the bed, and my mattress isn't really a firm mattress. It wobbles about a lot, and I think I literally screamed at that point because I was so scared that if he lost his balance, he could come toppling down on top of me and do a lot of damage, not only to me but to himself, clattering yourself off a metal frame that has pins going into my bone. I'm pretty sure he did it again after I had spoke about it, but he had said that it was kind of instinct. He didn't mean it the second time. It was just a habit. But I was kind of like, I don't feel safe or respected in this moment. That was fine. He left the next day, went to work, and I got up to have a wash and make my breakfast. And when I went into the kitchen, it was a mess. He hadn't cleaned up after himself. And I think if I was looking from it as a point of being able-bodied, it wouldn't have been as bad, because I literally think it would have taken him 5 minutes to clean up that mess. However, me having the frame and being on crutches and moving slower, it took me 45 minutes to clean up his mess. And by the time I had finished it, I was having a full-on meltdown, crying because I was so angry. And it was just amplified by the fact that I had messaged him and he had basically disregarded most of it and said like, oh well, I'll come back and clean it up. And it's like, it's not about the fact that you left a mess, it's the fact that I asked you not to and you just keep showing me constant disrespect. However, I clearly didn't learn my lesson, because I went back and tried to kind of reconcile that one about a year ago, but that's probably a whole episode in itself, to be honest, because that was a wild ride. But I was seeing somebody else for a period, and we got on really well and we really vibed, and I enjoyed his company a lot. However, after kind of the first frame coming off and everything happening, I felt as if nobody was going to love me or want me, and I ended up getting myself into a relationship with this person, and it went on for quite a while, and it is something that I feel so horrible about, because I didn't even realise, and as soon as I realised that I had thought that I wasn't going to be wanted and that's why I was in the relationship, I spoke to him and I ended it, because I couldn't do that. It is never my intention to hurt someone, but sometimes we hurt people no matter how hard you try not to. But because of everything that I had been through and all of my scars and just everything that had happened, I thought that I was less desirable as a person. I thought that nobody would want to be in a relationship with me, and that I wouldn't really be able to keep or maintain friends because it was going to be more effort for people. However, the people that I have in my life and that have shown up for me over the last 3 years have really proved to me that that isn't true in the slightest. And I know myself now that that's not true, but there are definitely still some days where I think I'm less than because I'm in a wheelchair and I only have one leg. Anyway, after that little sidetrack, I think COVID actually helped things for me in a bit of a selfish way, to be honest. As much as I thought that I should be out there on the front line with my nursing degree, helping people, I knew that I couldn't. And I also knew that it wasn't just my life that was on hold. Everybody else's life was on hold too. And I didn't have to sit and see on social media that people were out living the life that I thought that I was going to live. And it actually made things easier for me, but it also filled a lot of things with anxiety. And I had friends that were still working in the wards, and I was hearing what was going on and how difficult it was. And I felt kind of thankful that I was in a position where I didn't have to deal with that, but I was having to deal with everything else that I was going through. Most days I woke up and I just wanted to go back to sleep. The later that I woke up, the less of the day that I had to get through. I tried to find things to occupy me, to fill my time, but I didn't have a lot of concentration to read books. I tried to start learning sign language because I thought, well, this is going to be beneficial when I go back to nursing, because we might potentially get patients that are non-verbal, and I can spend this time learning to do something that is going to help me when I get back to nursing. But I did like 3 lessons, and then I came back to it and I couldn't remember anything I had done. My memory was so shocking. However, one of the ways that I had some form of routine was I had one day that was dedicated to cleaning my pins. That was all I did. I got up, I had a wash, I had my lunch, and then it took me about 2 hours to clean my pins. So that was my dedicated day. So talking about cleaning my pins helps me to lead on to some tips that I think could be useful if you have a frame or if you know somebody that has a frame. So for pinsites, big first tip is please wash your hands, use some sanitizer. If you can, get a sterile dressing pack from your doctors along with some Prontosan and gauze, which is what I use to clean my pinsites. That is what I was told to use by the team of nurses and doctors. Some surgeons use different methods. Some surgeons prefer to have the pins covered over with foam instead of gauze. However, I used Prontosan and gauze. And to clean my pinsites, what I would do is I would take off all of the gauze off of the pins. I think for my first frame, I had about 38 pins in my leg, and they went from my ankle all the way up to my hip. I am also going to preface this by saying sometimes you can't clean your own pins. Sometimes they're in an awkward position where you just can't bend to reach it, and that is totally okay. District nurses will come out and do it for you. You might have to go up to clinic appointments at the hospital, but people will do it for you if you're not able to do it yourself. Don't push yourself if you find that it's something that you cannot do, because that is totally okay. So I took off all the old swabs, and then I would go around with a bit of gauze soaked in Prontosan, and I would individually clean the pins, and I would use a new piece of gauze for every pin that I did, just in case any of the pins had bacteria or something from an infection. I didn't want to be passing it on to another pin. So I did that, and then I would go back round and I would wrap the pins in gauze. And for this, sometimes the pins were maybe in a formation where I could use one piece of gauze and I could get all 3 pins. So I would do that because it was a bit easier and it took up a bit less time. And sometimes when the frame is close to your leg and you have a lot of pins in the same place, if you're putting a lot of gauze on it, it can end up being quite uncomfortable. Some people prefer when dressing their pins if they are dry and not leaking any fluid, they will leave them uncovered. That is totally personal preference. I preferred to keep all of my pins covered because I have a little ginger fluff ball, and I really didn't want any fluff or anything, any fur getting into my pin sites. On the pins, I had rubber stoppers that came down to hold the gauze in place. However, I did get a very handy tip from a lady in the frame support group that her son had a frame, and she had said that he was about 15 and they didn't have anything to keep the gauze on the pins, so they got a Nerf bullet and they cut it up and down the way, and then they just put it over the pin, and that helped keep the gauze on it. And I just thought that is such a genius idea. Like, I really wish that I had known that when I still had my frame on, because coming to the end of my frame journey, the amount of heat that my leg was producing, the rubber was all kind of breaking down and actually starting to melt onto my leg, that having a Nerf bullet would have been so handy. So what are some signs of infection for your pin sites? Redness, if it's hot to touch, if it's sore, if there is cloudy discharge coming out of it, like pus or blood. Sometimes you do get some discharge from pin sites if you have been moving a lot. I found that a lot when I was moving my ankle, it could get sore and it was quite leaky. However, if it's clear fluid, that is healthy fluid to come out of your body. But if there is something that you see that you're ever concerned about, speak to your surgeon team. They might have a pin site nurse. I know my team had a frame nurse who I had a mobile number for, that I could send pictures of the pin sites. But after I kind of got more in tune of knowing if I had an infection or not, I would just phone up my GP and say, hi, this is the antibiotics that I need to take. I have a pin site infection for the ilizarov frame. And sometimes they would give medication, sometimes they would say, can you send us a picture of it, and then give medication. But as soon as you think there is anything wrong, it is better to be safe than sorry and just ask about it. Moving on to tip number 2, it is, I'm not sure if it's a tip or if it's more just some advice. I guess tips and advice are the same thing, but it's regarding timescales. And I think I have probably mentioned this already, but the timescales you are given are a guide. It is not something that is set in stone. It is not a promise. It is an average guess. I think I had a year of just another 3 months, and I ended up saying, look, you have been telling me it's going to be just another 3 months for 12 months. I need to know what's happening, because I'm not believing you when you're saying it's just another 3 months. Something I really liked about my surgeon was that he was always very upfront and honest and transparent, and he sat me down and they had said, look, I'm going to be totally honest with you, that normally we have a load of people who you can look at and say, okay, they were 30 months, they were 12 months, here's the middle ground, but you're the first person that I'm having to do this kind of thing on, so I don't have an average for you, and if I'm being honest, I don't know. It'll be healed when it's healed. Take that as you will. I know it is very hard not to get hooked up on it's just going to be a few more weeks, a few more months. It is so difficult not to get into that thinking, but it ends up causing yourself so much pain. So in the long run, try to think of it as a guideline, not a promise. Another thing that I thought would be helpful to talk about is trying to find comfort when you have the frame on. I think it is very difficult if you have a frame that is just below your knee. Then elevating it on some pillows is usually pretty good. Some people have said that using bean bags under the frame can help. I honestly thought that pillows were my best friend. Like, I used to get the piss ripped out of me by my pals because of the amount of pillows that I have on my bed, but I just come back at them and say, look, I'm disabled and it's all about my comfort, so are you being ableist right now? Sounds like it to me. But I actually had a wedge pillow that's basically like a triangle pillow. You can find them on Amazon, that I had behind my head, and that helped me to sleep because I found it really hard to lie flat on my back, and I also couldn't turn on my side. So having something that kind of propped me up helped. And I used to put loads of pillows underneath the frame. Sometimes I didn't need a pillow under the frame. Sometimes I needed one up at my hip to help me turn a wee bit. I did find that I would usually find a very comfy position, and then a week would pass and I would change my bed, and then I would get into my bed after I had changed it and I wouldn't be able to get comfy in the same position again. It is something that is trial and error, coming back to being individual, and the same thing doesn't work for everybody. You will find your own way of getting comfortable. But one thing I would say is that if you're prone to swelling or if you're in pain, elevating your frame up and stuff like that is a very, very good way to help it. So I also have some slight tips on showering. Initially, I didn't have much experience with showering, and I was one of the people that was actually asking for tips and saying, what do I do here? So when I was in hospital, the two showers that I had, the only two showers that I had for the first 2 years, I had with a bag wrapped around my leg, sitting down in a chair. That is something that you can do, is just to put a bag around it. You can get bags online that work with casts. I think they also do bigger sizes. I'm not 100% sure, but doubling a few bin bags up and securing it with sellotape works just as well if there is a reason why you can't get the frame wet, or if you're wanting to shower more than once a week, because I was told only to shower once a week and to do it on the day where I was cleaning my pinsites. So for showering, having nothing covering the leg, I would take all of the gauze off of my leg like I would do when I was starting to do a pinsite clean, and I would get in the shower and I would get washed, and I was told to avoid getting any soap on your leg and round about the pins, just to kind of do it with water. And when you get out of the shower, use a clean towel to pat down the leg. A lot of people, or some people, like to use a hairdryer on a cool setting to blow the leg and make sure that it is totally dry. I had a handheld fan that I would use to make sure that it was dry. And then I would go round with my Prontosan soaked gauze and wrap up the pins, and it makes the process of cleaning your pins a bit easier if you do it that way. With showering and washing, I would suggest not having a bath when you have the frame on, because immersing your frame under the water has more risk of you getting infections. However, if you do have to take a bath, if there is no other way you can get washed, or if a bath is a form of self-care that you just really need because it's the one thing that would help you, then you can always get a stool on the outside of your bath and kind of prop it up, or you can get shelves that sit over the top of your bath that you could always try and prop your leg up on if you have just like a lower leg frame. I'm not sure that would work if you have a frame like mine that spanned the whole length of my leg. Another tip is moving around. When I was fitted with my frame, it was drilled into me the importance of getting up and moving around and walking and putting weight through your frame. And because the house that I was in wasn't wheelchair accessible, I was told when I got home initially that I should be walking ideally and trying to avoid using my wheelchair at all costs, apart from when I was going out the house, and initially my wheelchair was the only place that I could sit in outside of my bed. However, when I moved to a flat that was more wheelchair accessible, I realised that I was getting up and walking about and still doing things, but the opportunity to be in my wheelchair and to be able to sit and do the dishes or sit and hang up my washing, it made things so much easier for myself. Try not to compare yourself to what other people are doing, how other people are managing to get on. I have seen somebody who went rock climbing with their frame on, and there was people that can walk without any crutches, any walking sticks. I had my 2 crutches for the whole 2 years, and initially it was a lot of beating myself up of why can they do that and I can't. But again, it goes back to being individuals and having different injuries and having a different journey. Try to not be hard on yourself. Try not to compare yourself to the point where other people are at. I find for myself, I compare myself to where I was at 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. I compare myself to where I was at the start of this journey, but also try very hard not to compare yourself to what you were like before you had the frame, because it's different, it's not the same. You're not expected to be able to do all of the same things that you used to do with the frame on. Saying that, some people do manage to go back to work and live a pretty fairly normal life with the frame on. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to do things. You might be able to do things nobody else has been able to do, but just try to keep those expectations for yourself reasonable. From the talk of expectations, that also leads on to asking for help around the house, when you're outside of the house, being comfortable to ask your family and friends to do things to help you. If that means having carers in that have to come and help make your dinner because you're too tired when it gets to that time at night, make the most of it. Don't try to be a martyr. Is that the right word? I don't know. Don't try to be a hero by pushing yourself into burnout because you think that you need to do it all on your own, because you don't. I spent months trying to kind of learn these things and teach myself these things, and even now to this point, there is still a lot of things that I try to look at in a different way than what my brain wants to see, and it's a process. It's learning. It's going to take time. I just constantly kept thinking in those few months that my leg wasn't healing, that I was going to go to the hospital and that nothing was going to have happened. I was very in my head about it. I just wanted to know that the things that I was doing round about the house and how much I was pushing myself was worth it, because if it wasn't worth it, what am I doing it for? So I ended up reaching out to my surgeon, and I had said that I understand due to COVID if you can't see me or you don't have an appointment slot, or you would rather that I waited for the 6 months, but I'm really struggling and I really need to go on, and I would really appreciate it if they would be able to give me an appointment. I think it was maybe the start of June 2020 that I got that appointment to see my surgeon, and I was going with the certainty in my head that my leg hadn't healed and that it was going to be an appointment with another very hard conversation. I was in tears when I got the x-rays done because I was just so sure that it hadn't healed, and I went into the room and I was waiting. I think it was one of the first things he said. He said, "I think we're going to try and take it off." And I was like, what? The frame? Like, you're going to try and take the frame off? And he said, like, yeah, it's looking as if your bones have actually healed. And I could not believe it. Like, the switch from certainty that my leg hadn't healed straight to leg healed, frame coming off, getting my life back. holy shit. I was in shock. It was the total opposite. I think a few days after I had that appointment, I got a letter to say that due to COVID and the backlog of hospital waiting times and surgery waiting times, it was looking at roughly 42 weeks before I would have my surgery. So that is double the time that I had already had the frame on for. So me and my brother were covered under my dad's private medical insurance from his work, and we had a conversation about me going private because I knew that my surgeon did work part-time. He did work for a private hospital in Glasgow, and he is one of the only surgeons in Glasgow that does these procedures in these frames. So we started kind of going about that, putting the things in motion, and my surgeon throughout was actually very apologetic. He tried to get me moved up the waiting list when I'd went for my pre-assessment, and before I had got the surgery done to get the frame removed. He kept apologising for the fact that I had come in as an NHS patient and I had been an NHS patient and I should be getting seen on the NHS. And even though I had said, look, it is covered by medical insurance, like we're not paying for it out of pocket, I could still see how guilty I felt that it wasn't being able to get done by the NHS. But part of that is also because I wasn't patient enough to wait for it to get done on the NHS. So that was me. I was booked in for my surgery to remove my frame for the 13th of July 2020, and I think that is a good place for me to end it today. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to this week's episode of the Cripple Chronicles. Next week, we are going to be talking about my frame removal, what it was like being in a private hospital versus an NHS hospital, getting my bone infection, getting a citation from court, and thinking about amputation. So I don't think you're going to want to miss next week's episode because it is going to be juicy, full of all the tea. Like I said in the intro, if you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. All listening platforms, please rate and review. I would love it if you would give me 5 stars, but I would also love it even more if you would just be honest. If you want to get in touch, send an email to me at cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Cripple Chronicles Pod. I will be posting things on Instagram for you to get involved and have your say. Thank you so much for listening. Bye!